I'll just let Councillor Phelan take his seat and we'll get started. So councillors will begin. I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 15th of June 2021 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:31 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the city's website following the meeting. So I'll go to item 2. Attendance and apologies. I note we have an apology from Councillor Mansfield, and I think we have everybody else. Item 3, disclosures of interest. I have a disclosure of interest, and I understand a number of other councillors may do as well. Should I start us off? I, Mayor Taylor, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 15th of June. The agenda item is C2. The nature of my interest is impartiality. I am a fellow elected member with Councillor Davis. Other Councillor De Vries?
I, Rosemary De Vries, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 15th of June 2021, agenda item C2, which is an impartiality interest. The nature of my interest is Matt Davis is a fellow councillor and director of the firm Clopper & Davis, who are the architects for this development application. I'm not sure about this one, but I'll do it anyway. I have a second one for C11. I, Rosemary De Vries, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 15th of June 2021, agenda item C11. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality. The nature of my interest is that I mentioned in the report that's being responded to. That's it. Thank you.
The CEO would like to make a comment on the declarations regarding C11.
Thank you, Mayor, and through the Chair. As you all know from my email contact this afternoon, I had approached the Department of Local Government for advice on this subject. Unfortunately, they haven't got back to me with any advice at this stage. However, having said that, the report is there as a placeholder only, and unless any elected member wishes to discuss the report, it's not planned to be discussed this evening, so on that basis there would be no need to declare an interest. There certainly will be a need to declare an interest next week when the item is recovered, subject to the advice I get back from the department. But since it's not likely or planned to be discussed this evening, there's no need to declare an interest in that report at this time.
Councillor Hammersley.
Can I have clarification that this matter is on the agenda? So is it off the agenda or is it on the agenda?
Through the Chair, it is on the agenda in a heading sense only as a placeholder. As you know from the email communications over the last week, the report is currently being finalised. It's in draft form, has not yet been finalised, but will be finalised and distributed by the end of the week.
Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I, Derek Nash, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 22nd of June 2021, agenda item C2. I'm a fellow councillor of Councillor Davis, who is in turn a principal of Clopper and Davis, the architects for this application, and I also know both principals personally and as fellow architects. And also, I, Derek Nash, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 22nd of June 2021, agenda item C6. An impartiality, I forgot to mention the earlier one, impartiality pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for council members, council committee members and candidates. Agenda item C6, impartiality pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for council members, committee members and candidates. The nature of my interest is I personally know Daniela Simone and Giancarlo Trettel, one of the applicants recommended for funding, and item 1B of the officer recommendation. I understand the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register.
Further declarations? Councillor Davis.
Thanks. I, Councillor Matthew Davis, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on Tuesday the 22nd of June, agenda item C2. The type of interest I wish to declare is financial pursuant to section 5.60A of the Local Government Act 1995. The nature of my interest is I am a partner at Clopper and Davis Architects, who are engaged as the architects for the proposal at item C2 of the agenda. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the CEO in an appropriate register.
I'm assuming there's further interest, so who'd like to go next? Let's get through these. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. I, Murray Rowe, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered at the council meeting and its meeting to be held on whenever, agenda item C2. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct, Regulations 2007. The nature of the interest is the applicant is a councillor and he is known to me. Thank you. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
To be held on the... Do you wish me to start again? Now the recording's on. I, Rick Powell, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 22nd of June 21. Agenda item C1. The proposed development, it's an impartiality interest. The nature of my interest is the proposed development is in the South Ward and some of the objectors to the project are known to me. For the public record, I have no industry or financial association with the proposed development. And I, Rick Powell, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by the Council at its meeting to be held on the 22nd of June. Item C2, the nature of the interest is impartiality. The nature of my interest is one of the architects for the proposed development is fellow councillor Matt Davis. For the public record, I have no industry, financial or other association with the proposed project. Thank you.
Councillor McMullen.
I, Councillor David McMullen, wish to declare an interest in item C2 to be considered at Council's meeting on the 22nd of June 2021. The type of interest I wish to declare is an impartiality interest, and the nature of my interest is that Councillor Matt Davis is a director of the architecture firm engaged in respect of the development, which is the subject of item C2. Thank you.
Councillor Phelan.
I, Blake Phelan, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on Tuesday the 22nd of June, agenda item C2. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to clause 22 of the Code of Conduct. The nature of my interest is Matt Davis. The applicant is a fellow councillor. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in appropriate register.
Thank you. Councillor Stroud.
I, Councillor Stephanie Stroud, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 15th of June, being the briefing forum, and for the 22nd, being the OCM. The agenda item is C2. The nature of my interest is an impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11, and the nature of my interest is Councillor Davis, partner of Clopper and Davis Architects, is a fellow Subiaco councillor. Clopper and Davis are the architects for this DA. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in appropriate register. I have a second declaration. Thank you. I, Councillor Stephanie Stroud, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on the 15th of June, being the briefing forum, and the 22nd of June, being the OCM. The agenda item is C9. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality, and the nature of the interest is I am the City of Subiaco Councillor Representative on WMRC, which is offering the Verge Valet service. I understand that the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held tonight and on 22 June 2021. Agenda item C2. Type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for Council members, committee members and candidates. The nature of my interest is I understand that Councillor Davis is a principal of Clopper Davis Architects, the architects for the application. I sit on this council with Councillor Davis. I understand the above information will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting and recorded by the Chief Executive Officer in an appropriate register. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I, Lynette Jennings, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its agenda briefing forum to be held on 15 June 2021. Agenda item C2. The nature of my interest is an impartiality interest pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for Council members, etc. The nature of my interest is Clopper and Davis are the architects for the development subject of item C2. Matt Davis, a fellow councillor, is, as far as I'm aware, a director of Clopper and Davis Architects. Thanks.
If there's no further declarations, we'll move on. So councillors, we'll move on. We have no approved deputations tonight. Please note, those of you who are in the council chamber, that the conditions of entry are on the door. I don't think we need to read them out. So we'll move on to announcements by the presiding member without discussion. I'm frequently asked what it's really like at council for mayors to get things done in local government. Many people seem to forget that being Mayor of Subiaco is not about me nor the individual who holds the position. Being Mayor is about leadership and advocacy and encouraging council to do great things for our community. Through my social media, and that's largely the only place I can interact because I have been mostly sidelined from council communication channels, I do often talk about what people are doing in Subiaco, what I'm doing as a community representative, what others in our community are doing that is forward-thinking and progressive, and not a lot about what council is doing. This is because many council decisions have been to not do things, and it's extremely difficult to champion not doing something. We're not partnering at Subiaco East with the state government to build... Yes, councillor?
Mayor Taylor, I'd like to object to your speech and direct you to the local law and what the announcements by the presiding member are meant to contain, and I'd ask you to cease your adverse reflections on your council and maintain the local law, which is quite clear about what you can use your speeches for. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley, this is announcements by the presiding member without discussion, and I am often asked to communicate what is going on in the city, and I think it is fair that councillors know what I am asked and that I should be able to give an answer. What's your point of order?
I'm not having a discussion. I'm raising a point of order under the local law, which is what governs us and what governs you. And if you read 2.8, you will see that your role in this is to give us information that we need to make decisions, not to lecture us about our past decisions, and I would ask that you stop.
Councillor Hammersley, you've raised your point of order. I've heard your point of order. I am participating in the presiding member speech without discussion. I am able to share what council is doing, and I am taking great care not to adversely reflect, but share what is occurring at the City of Subiaco, and that is my role. I would like to talk about what we are doing, but I don't have things to say that we are doing if council is not doing them. We're not partnering at Subiaco East to build a civic infrastructure. We're not upgrading Lord's Gym because we want it to be a premier place for exercise and excellence, or frankly because it needs it. We're not fixing the toxic mould or fundamental issues within this administration centre. We're not working with the health department to optimise the Tom Dador site. 4 years ago, I wanted Subiaco to contemplate saying yes, and saying yes to things like the derelict Pavilion Market site, saying yes to addressing business confidence after losing football.
Mayor, you really are taking this too far. You are obviously offending council. That is not your right in a presiding member speech. Will you please just stop?
I'm not doing anything other than telling the truth, and that is something that this council may need to hear.
Well,
it's a point of order or not a point of order. It's not meant to be an interruption, Councillor Stroud.
you're obviously turning me off so I can speak. Thank you. Are you going to speak? Yes, thank you. You are obviously calling adverse reflections against council, and that is inappropriate, and it's not the role of the presiding member speech. Look it up, 2.8. It's not, you are taking advantage of your position and you're taking...
Councillor Stroud, I've heard your point of order. I'm progressing with my speech. It is very short. If I could get through it, we would be done by now. I'd like to say yes to addressing business confidence after losing football, and most basic of all, saying yes to good governance, professional behaviours, basic fairness and decency. The notion of yes was backed by the community when I became mayor in 2017. Now I walk into council workshops and councillors say things like, when do I get to veto this? And staff members say, we're not showing you all the options, including what the consultants recommend, because we already know council is against that. This isn't how council is meant to work, and it's not optimal or peak function. And if I am allowed to have a personal opinion, this isn't how I work. I said a couple of months ago that I don't want to be mayor in a place that flaunts the rule of law, nor do I want to be mayor of a council that refuses to make it about people and place. I want to be mayor of a place that considers all the options, that looks to make things happen and puts decency and fairness at the forefront. I'd like us to get to the questions on tonight's agenda briefing. Thank you. So, councillors, we move on to officers' reports for discussion. We're at C1, If anyone had any declarations that requires them to leave the room for C1, perhaps you'd like to do so. We're at page 2, the Responsible Authority report for Evans Street. Any questions on this one? Councillor Rowe?
This might sound a bit picky in the report, but on page 3 we've got down a summary as we normally get, and I note that at the bottom of the page 3 it talks about side setbacks, and it refers to, in the right hand column, it says variations and assessment of how it varies from what's approvable. But when something is higher than is approvable, why do we put on there the words meets acceptable outcome? Is there any acceptable setback when something is higher than what's meant to be approved? I know it's a bit of a technicality, but when somebody briefly looks at the report, why would it say meets acceptable outcome if something is 2 stories higher than it should be? Thank you.
Manager for Planning Services, are you able to take that one?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. That's in response to that setback element. So the ARCOS prescribes acceptable outcomes. Perhaps for the building height, it could say that discretion is required or the building is higher, but for that particular element in the setbacks, we assess it in accordance with what the planning framework says.
I think it would be more appropriate that it said the setbacks meet acceptable outcome at the 4-storey level, but everything above that is not approvable, or words to those effect. Because if something is limited to 4 stories and it's got a 5th and a 6th story, technically there is no acceptable setback for those 2 levels. I just think it's a more accurate way of describing what is something that's over the height in its first instance. So it's clear that the following, the increased height is not approvable as far as setbacks go.
Okay. Sure. Further questions on C1? Councillor Powell.
Had a follow-up question then on that. I think I understand what Councillor Rowe's getting at, but is there not 2 ways to gain approval either through the prescribed, sorry, I haven't got it in front of me, but design principles, or through the alternative, which I can't think of the name of at the moment. But is that not the case? And the alternative allows for 2 extra stories in this case.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, through the ARCOS Volume 2, even if you meet acceptable outcomes, it's all based on an element objective assessment. So the way that it's presented in the table, there's still setbacks to upper levels, even if the development exceeds what the height limit for that is. So you still have to assess it in that. But yes, correctly so, it's an element objective assessment.
If there's no further questions on that one, I'll go back to Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor, to staff. This proposal has been before the council before, and it was sent back by, I think, by the Joint Development Assessment Panel to the applicants for some changes. What changes have been made in regards to bulk and height and other setbacks, and will these address the problems of overshadowing at 336 Onslow Road, the apartments there?
Okay, Manager.
Thank you, and through you, Presiding Member. The changes are outlined in the table on page 3. It starts on page 3 and 4. So where we've bolded information that talks very clearly to the changes between the original plans considered by council and the amended plans. With regard to overshadowing, on page 40 of the attachments, there's an overshadowing plan which demonstrates from that the overshadowing has been somewhat reduced by a shift in bulk. So some of the bulk has been shifted from the northern building to the southern building to take it away from the 336 Onslow Road properties, and that's resulted in a reduction of overshadowing to that, to 336 Onslow Road building. As officers, we still feel that it could go a bit further to not overshadow the outdoor living areas, but the applicant has made some changes to reduce the overshadowing. I think it's about 46 square metres, as mentioned in the report.
Further questions on C1? Councillor Davis?
Just further to that, is the those lots to the south that are overshadowed, is the zoning of those R100?
Through Mayor Taylor, that's correct.
And so there's nil requirement for overshadowing on those lots?
Thank you. And through Mayor Taylor, there is a nil number requirement, but through the element objective, it's very clear that it says that overshadowing should be minimised and priority should be given to considering outdoor living areas. So while there's a hard number nil requirement under the R codes, it's still under the element objective assessment, which, as I described earlier, is the assessment we're required to undertake.
Councillor Davis? Sorry, I've just bumped you off.
Sorry. So from the officer perspective, it's meeting the acceptable outcomes strictly, but it's not achieving the element objectives.
Thank you. And through Mayor Taylor, as there'd be no minimum overshadow or maximum overshadowing requirements, there's no acceptable outcome to achieve there. So it is only an element objective assessment, but that's correct.
Further questions on C1? Oh. Councillor
Through you, Mayor Taylor, I think the question I asked has already been answered, but I think one of the key concerns has been on the bulk and scale and the impact on the future redevelopment of the surrounding area. Can you just quantify what could be done to reduce the impact of that setbacks, and how much more should be put into the setbacks to make it sort of meet the future redevelopment of the area in terms of the local planning policies, 1.2 residential development apartments, LPP 1.2. Thank you.
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, as I've said, some of the overshadowing has been taken away, which is definitely an improvement from the previous plans. The remaining issues with the setbacks in the street still remain, but where the actual apartments have been relocated to doesn't have any material effect on I guess on our local planning policy, so there's no changes there. The existing concerns with the street setbacks continue to remain, but in considering what the amended plans have come from, the changes made only slightly improve the overshadowing, so there's not too much further we can assess on that regard.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mayor, I'd like to address the rubbish collection. On recycling weeks, by my reading of the table, I think that was on page 449, it looks like there'll be 24 big bins out on the verge on one day of the week. So how long is a rubbish truck going to take to collect those bins? and what would be the timing of that collection? For example, could it be in peak hour? And what effect would that have on the traffic in Onslow Road?
I'd like to take that one. Take that one then.
Take it. Thank you. Through you, Mayor Taylor, we referred this to the city's waste team who were okay with the waste management plan, but with that technical information, we'll take that question on notice and get back to you.
Further questions on C1? Councillor Powell.
Policies. Sorry, would you like me to start again, or no? This is in regard to the local planning policies. The applicants have taken issue with the LPS, I should say LPP 1.2, saying that little regard should be given to them in the determination of this application, essentially saying that they don't work. Is there a need to re-look at or rework the local planning policies?
Manager.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, we don't see any need to revisit our local planning policies since they've been recently approved. What I'd say is not uncommon for applicants to not agree with the local government's or state government's planning framework.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm not sure if it's related to that. The following on from Councillor Powell, on page 40 of the attachment 1 to C1, it has in blue changes to officer recommendation. Following the consideration of this application at the April DAP meeting, the city received legal advice unrelated to this application, providing governance on what matters are appropriate for preparing reasons for refusal. As a result, the city has adjusted its approach to this matter and the original recommendation has been reconsidered. I just wondered if you could sort of provide a little bit more info on what that's about. Did you want the page numbers again?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, that was with regard to the reasons for refusal. So on a separate matter, we had some updated advice to say that some of the reasons for refusal that we were using probably weren't the best. Notwithstanding that, we had other ones in there that the reasons were reasons for refusal were covered. So we've just reworded them to be consistent with recent advice received.
Any further questions on Councillor Powell?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor. How many times has this project been before the design review panel, and what's its score now? Has it achieved the design excellence required for the bonuses it's seeking?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. So it's now been through 5 iterations of the city's design review panel. On the last iteration on the 25th of May, it received a green or supported recommendation from the design review panel, and that came from the chair's DRP chair's feedback from the previous meeting of all green, so all supported for all elements. And I'll just correct myself to say it was 4 iterations and one of the DRP chair feedback. I think that answered the question, actually.
Thank you. So, Councillor Powell?
And that is the, if you like, the hallmark for gaining discretions, significant discretions.
Manager for Planning Services. If I heard you correctly, it was all green on the last iteration?
Yes, that's right. Thank you, through you, Mayor Taylor. I'll just find the wording for what the panel recommended, so I don't quote the wrong thing. Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. So in the attachments, it says that the panel was supportive of the improvements made. They didn't reconsider the proposal in its whole, including the reallocation of the bulk and the increased deep soil planting, and it is to be considered of a good design proposal. So it didn't go as far to say as design excellence.
Well, if there's no further questions, actually, Councillor Rowe, did you have your hand up?
I won't ask for a response right now because maybe the staff won't be able to answer it, but are we really considering 62 apartments and we're not sure where the rubbish is going? We haven't talked about introducing a policy, have we, about when you get over a certain size, not having to pick up from the road, but having an internal access, which is what we've done in other sites. So we're really thinking about, could you tell us before the next meeting, are we really going to have 62 rubbish bins on the road, especially Onslow Road, before the next meeting, please?
I understood that perhaps when it came to council last time, we had some discussion on that with the multiple unit dwelling waste solutions. Did you want to talk through that?
Thank you. And the question I noticed, and through you, Mayor Taylor, was taken about the time it would take the trucks to be there. So that's why we needed a little bit more time to answer that one. In these sorts of developments, I believe the city provides two options with waste collection, whether it's done by the city's own services and in-house. It's probably a question for another time on whether council, reviews that, but that's not. It's a technical matter, not necessarily associated with the planning assessment at this stage.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, are the element objectives that the DRP considering the same element objectives that the city officers are considering when preparing the report? Is the first part of the question.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, no, the element objectives are a planning assessment undertaken by the officers. The design review panel considers the design principles under SPP 7, and the element objectives obviously sit under the design principles. So they don't consider the objectives, but they consider the principles of the design. They are interrelated, however.
The second part of the question then is that given that the DRP gave a green light to all of the element objectives, how then do the officers come to a different assessment in relation to the overshadowing element?
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, the element objective assessment is much more detailed and is actually a planning assessment and not a design assessment. So it's a planning framework that we assess. The design review panel provide design guidance and advice. So you can have, it's essentially two different assessments. They do talk to each other, but one's on planning, one's on design. The design review panel wouldn't have necessarily assessed it on the design, on the overshadowing cast, and they wouldn't have that ability to do that.
I just have a follow-up question then, but just from before what you mentioned on overshadowing with the lots being R100, I wondered how that fed into that consideration that you just talked about.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, the element objective still requires an assessment on outdoor living areas, regardless of the zoning of the site. So it's an outdoor living area of a dwelling, and also major openings as well. So it doesn't really matter what the dwelling is zoned. That comes into it with lower residential assessment under the R Codes Volume 1, where you have specific numbers where 25% overshadowing, for example.
Further questions on C1? Councillor Powell.
Yes, I hope that this is the final one. It's on the traffic and on the single entrance to the development from Onslow Road. I think there are 4 crossovers at present to the site. Why has the council then 2 points? One, is it the council's determination that the entry should be from Onslow Road rather than being from Onslow and Evans Street? Was that taken from reading into the report or into the application from the applicants? It would appear that that was their decision to put that entry only on Onslow Road was in response to the council officers, and because the council officers had raised concerns about the kindergarten and it being a local road, Evans Street being a local road.
Manager for Planning Service, did you get all of that?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, I think this is very similar to a question you may have raised at the DAP meeting, which we answered. It's a tricky site with Railway Road being the primary road, so we're looking at taking access from a secondary street, and the location where the city considered the access and recommended it was probably the best out of all the scenarios that could be considered. Onslow Road is a larger road compared to Evans Street. Yes, it's not the best with the location of the road intersection across the road. However, considering all the options, this was probably the best one. Generally, with these sorts of developments, you try to minimise the amount of crossovers, and that improves traffic safety as well.
Just to follow up on that, though, the proposed location now is one that is prohibited under the Australian Standards Association. That's my belief from the report. So why would we be recommending a prohibited area?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, it's not a prohibited area under the Australian standards.
Thank you. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, let's move to C2. C2 is the responsible authority report for 25 Roland Street, Subiaco. So we'll let Councillor Davis exit. Questions on C2? Any questions? If not, we can get Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, it's a pity he's left the room. He might be able to answer these the best. But I was just interested in the rooftop common area and how it relates to those photovoltaic cells. Like, is there a... because I'd imagine they would have a lot of reflective glare to them. And I just wondered, is there sort of a barrier to that? I was just interested how it all worked. Thank you. If Manager for Planning could talk through it with me. Thank you.
Manager for Planning Services, a question on the photovoltaic.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. On page 142 of the agenda, there's a section showing the building, and you can see that the photovoltaic cells will be on a piece of ceiling which is not at ground level, and it slopes away from the communal area space, so there shouldn't be any interaction or amenity loss given their location and a wall between those and the common space as well. So it's pretty clearly shown in the section.
Thank you. I have another question. Would it be right, really, that this is more of a 5-storey development with rooftop space? Is the rooftop space really considered a 6-storey? It just seemed to be an unfair assessment of the DA. Thank you.
Manager for Planning Services, question on the rooftop space.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. No, the rooftop is not considered a storey, and it's been considered correctly. It's 6 stories. If you look at, again, looking at that section shows it pretty well from the ground level, because the parking, you come in at ground and then you go down into the stackers. So it's the parking and then the lobby and the commercial tenancy plus the levels above it.
Thank you, Mayor. So when I looked at the plans, it seemed to me that it was 5 stories from the ground. So are you including the basement level as a storey, or is it 5 above the ground or 6? It is 6. Okay, sorry, I misread that. The one other issue is, and it's a bit historic, but when the Dev West building was approved, they had to include design for access to this site, to underground access to this site. And the reason being is because this site was just such a restricted, small rectangular site. And I'm just wondering, whether that had been considered in this plan, whether we, as a city, because we didn't want a crossover, it was dangerous to have a crossover on Roland, and then we didn't want a crossover on Forest either, whether that held any weight in the design to use that access from the Dev West building. Thank you.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, this issue has been considered on numerous times, and we did talk about consolidating access through that building with the applicant. I think perhaps if it was built at the same or similar time and approved, it probably would have been a bit easier to occur, but it relies on private transactions and considerations between 2 private people, and we can't force them to do that in this instance, so we've just considered it. Yes, it is a tight site. Absolutely take that on board, which is why there's probably been a few iterations of this development over the years.
Yes.
So Stark can confirm this is roughly the same height as what we approved last time when it came to that access way that Councillor Stroud was just talking about too. I think that was when we were thinking about extending Forest Walk as a pedestrian area. That's why we're trying to minimise crossovers, but anyway, that opportunity that we're just discussing has obviously gone by, but this is roughly the same height as what we approved last time, I think, is it?
Thank you, through Mayor Taylor. Yes, 6 stories, and the previous DA was approved at 6 too.
Further questions on C2? If not, we'll move to C3 then. So C3, Draft Local Planning Policy 2.2 on page 9. Any questions on C3? Councillor Powell?
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. Through you, Mayor. Page 11 of the agenda. It's an explanation of the provision of awnings where a building abuts a footpath, where this does not impact street trees. Does that mean that, could you explain whether that means that all buildings that abut the street now, would be, the preference would be for them to provide an awning over the street?
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Taylor, yes, that's correct. We are looking for a provision for our commercial areas to provide a level of pedestrian amenity, and that's through the use of awnings.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, I noticed that I think at the bottom of page 11, it's about what's included in the definition of plot ratio, that balconies, eaves, verandas and courtyards are not going to be included. Does that mean that they wouldn't be included then as well for setbacks, or that's the question, does that mean that they wouldn't be included as setbacks?
Thank you, and through you, Taylor. No, the plot ratio definition stands separate to setbacks, so the setbacks are considered separately, and this wouldn't change the way that setbacks are considered.
Further questions, Councillor Hammersley?
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. On page 11, just under the box, there's heading discretionary considerations, and I'm not sure I understood the first dot point. It says it can be demonstrated that due to development or site-specific circumstances that the development cannot achieve the particular development requirement. Is that any development, or is that the development proposed? Because it sort of seems a bit of a nonsense if it, because if someone chooses not to, with a particular design, not to achieve a development requirement, it seems a bit circular. So I was just wondering whether that sentence means that it's been assessed that you could never achieve the development requirement on the site.
Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. It includes new development and also existing additions and alterations to development, so that's why it's a bit difficult to write it in a way that captures everything. So yes, if there's a new development proposed, we'd always, starting from the scratch, we'd always say, well, given what you have a blank canvas, so you should be able to design around it. Sometimes with building codes and standards that can't be achieved for whatever reason, such as the BCA, and sometimes due to existing development and the nature of things that might be there and that can't change or that aren't proposed to change. That's why it's worded in such a way. But we can look to improve the wording if we can take that one on notice.
One more question on that, and just on those 3 dot points. I probably should have gone and actually checked the wording in the policy, but is that an and? They've got to achieve each of those. Is that an and? I'm guessing it probably is.
Through you, Taylor, that's correct. It's an and.
Further questions on C3? I'll move to C4 then. Draft Modified Local Planning Policy 7.6. Any questions on this one? No. I'll move to C5 then. Local Heritage Survey of the Triangle Precinct Endorsement Post Advertising. Any questions on C5? C6. Heritage Grant Applications. Any questions? C7. C6. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, yes. I look, it might be in here and I've missed it, but I was just wondering, because we've got this surplus of applications on this occasion, I vaguely think this is the first time since I've been on council that problem's arisen. And I'm just wondering, is it a regular problem where we have more applicants than we do have funds available?
Director?
Thank you. Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. It's probably the past couple of years where we've started to see additional, a surplus of applications where we've had to start making calls on not providing it for people who have had it recently. So I think the past few have, at least 2 to 3, I would say, have had an oversubscription.
Yes, I understand the logic of the way the staff have gone around the recommendation, but I'm just wondering whether, there's a few things. Maybe we need to look at the amount of grants, but the other thing is would there be a way in those instances where we don't have too many people applying that the funds can be expended? It's just that we're being asked to make a resolution that will really chop people off for every third year. And while in principle I fully agree with the approach of, let people have a turn, I'm just wondering if in instances where we do have $25,000 available and we only have 25,000 applicants and their restoration works are legitimately fitting into the policy, wouldn't we want to continue to encourage people to keep up their maintenance of these homes? And I'm just wondering if you'd thought about that and whether we could have a slightly different approach.
Thank you, and through Mayor Taylor, going back to it, it hasn't been undersubscribed for, I think, a couple of years now, but I do take the point. The issue that we have is by having a really clear period, then it's really clear for everyone. So sometimes people go to do a lot of work to put these grants in and then they get a rejection, and then obviously we need to assess them as well. So there's time and resources, but then how do we come up with the problem that, if we don't expend them, if we don't expend it in the first grant, it's a hard one. Perhaps we can have some more thoughts on that. And I mean, these come to council twice a year, so perhaps if one comes to council and we only have, we only expend 10 to 15, then at that council meeting we can then, open it up for the next round, for example. So it's probably on a case-by-case basis. At that council meeting, council can make that call. But yeah, it's a difficult problem.
Any further questions on C6? If not, I'll move to C7. Social infrastructure report. Any questions on the draft social infrastructure report? Councillor De Vries.
I did try, sorry, yes, through you, Mayor Taylor, a couple of questions to the Manager for Cultural Services, Ms Ackerman. Yeah, just a couple of questions. I really commend the report, it's great, but I was just interested in the page 19, point, I think it's point 6, where it said investigate the feasibility of rationalising, consolidating the Subiaco Community Centre. And then point 8 is Subiaco Community Centre investigate opportunities to sell. Could you just clarify whether that's something which rationalising, if that's what you mean by rationalise in the first case with the community centres, and is there any sort of urgent need to look at the selling option? Is it underutilised? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Through the Mayor, yes, the intention would be to rationalise the number. We have 3 community centres within very close distance. They are all underutilised, and we have an opportunity to create an incredible multi-purpose centre that would better meet the needs of the community today and into the future. With regards to selling, that is simply an option to explore, or we could perhaps be leasing the Subiaco Community Centre or other matters such as that.
Any further questions on the C7? Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, this just revolves around the nature of the recommended resolution. So it is that the draft City of Subiaco Social Infrastructure Report be endorsed. I guess my question is, does that mean we are actually authorising any specific actions to be taken arising from the report? Or is the more appropriate word that we're receiving this report? Because it's just that thing of there is quite a lot of sort of general, you know, aspirational statements like we might sell it, and whether this is the green light to go off and start those investigations. If that's what's intended, I think elected members should be very clear about that. If we're just receiving the report and it's going to be there as our underpinning information document, which is, I think, vaguely what I thought it was, then we would be, of course, receiving new actual proposals. So just, I don't know if you could comment on that.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, there certainly is the opportunity simply to receive the report, and endorsing it, you would be endorsing on what is referred to on page 17, where it says a great deal more work is needed on the vast majority of the recommendations. They would need a business case, a feasibility study, which would come back to you to make a decision on, in order that you could make an informed decision about, rather than simply a line in a document. So you may prefer to receive the report rather than not endorse it. I can appreciate why you would do that.
Any further questions on C7? No. I'll then move to C8, the dedication of portion of lot 700 Aberdare Road as rail reserve. Any questions? Councillor Powell.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, and through you, Mayor. To staff, it appears like there's been quite a large increase in the price of this project, going from 1.5 to about 4 million. So it's certainly going to be an expensive project. Now, in the executive summary, point 5, I think it is, in order to facilitate the construction, a portion of Harvey Road needs to be Aberdare needs to be excised and dedicated as road reserve. How much of the park are you actually looking at taking to dedicate to the road reserve?
Manager for Transport and Infrastructure Development.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. So the portion of land required is shown in attachment 1 of the report. Dedication plan that we would be providing to Landgate, which shows an area of 454 square metres for road widening, and that's in accordance with the existing MRS that runs along Aberdare Road on the northern side there.
Okay, thank you. Look, I gather there has been concerns from some of the residents in that area, especially those surrounding the park, about this plan. Considering how much it's going to cost, the statistics, I think, in the report argue that, or say that there's been, I think, 62 accidents at the intersection in the last 5 years, I think. Now, at the other end of Aberdare Road, where there has been significant road improvements and quietening of traffic, there seems to be, I think the figures are around about 50 accidents as well. So what evidence is there that this is actually going to improve the safety and reduce the accident rate of the area that's already had significant improvement, has the same sort of rate as the area that hasn't?
Manager?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. So we do allude to the expected benefits of this project. So we expect that the project would have a BCR, so a benefit cost ratio of 8, which is, to put that in context, most of our road improvement projects typically have a BCR of at least 2 to 3, and that's calculated based on the project cost divided compared to the actual benefits to the community through costs that would be incurred through crashes and injury and harm to the community. So the way it's calculated, there's based on the countermeasures that we're proposing through the design, which was covered through the previous report to council. There is a strong body of evidence that Main Roads has, which gives you a good indication of the likely percentage reduction in types of crashes based on countermeasures. So what we have done, we've applied the various countermeasures that would be applied to this intersection to get where you can derive an expected reduction in certain types of crashes, which for this one would be predominantly rear end and right angle crashes.
Yeah, thank you. Another one of the concerns, I think, is about the trees and that I think there was a report from Nedlands that the trees on the are stunted due to repetitive pruning. Now, if and the biggest cost, or one of the big costs in this project, seems to be the relocation of the high voltage power lines. Now, if they get shifted over, isn't that going to just cause more problems for the established trees on the park side because they will now be subjected to that level of pruning?
Manager?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Taylor. So no, there would not be the same situation that's currently there where there are trees underneath the overhead lines. The replacement trees have been put in the reserve, as noted in the report, well away from underneath the line, so they won't have that kind of required pruning that would lead to that situation that you described.
I presume, well, I presume there's been consideration given to undergrounding the power lines. How much more would that add to the cost of the project?
We weren't given an estimate because it was deemed not to be feasible for this project. So as part of the cost estimate that Netherlands sought, that was not one of the options that was available to them.
Just a couple more. In relation to the park itself, if these road changes go ahead, what safety considerations have been made considering the proximity, of playgrounds, kids' activities in the parks, etc.?
There's been a great deal of consideration. Obviously, there's no playgrounds or the like close to the proposed new edge of this reserve, and there's already that replacement planting that runs along there. As far as the changes to the road, that will just mean the curb line will be shifting to the old boundary. So you can imagine that road dedication portion that would form a buffer before you even get to the new road, where again there's already fairly established and newly planted trees there. So I don't believe there's any real risk to the users of the park from the changes.
No. Thank you. And just final one. The report says that there's not likely to be much impact on the neighbouring properties, but what's planned to reduce traffic noise, if there's increased traffic noise, and the visual effects, on the adjacent properties?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. So obviously we've taken those comments that we've received from the community on board, and obviously there's already been some planting done there. So as part of the detailed design, we'd look at what further work could be done, taking on board the feedback from the residents in the area. So that would likely mean potential further plantings and other measures done as part of the overall project to, I guess, allay those concerns from residents.
Thank you. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I note that, as I expected, that we're told there's no financial implications in this decision because it's just about the road widening. But I was just wondering, as a matter of curiosity, have we dealt with the need for the additional funding in the budget this year? Is that been identified as a budget item?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. So the required funds to progress the design as per the previous council resolution are already in the existing budget. The only need for further funds would come at the design stage, or if there's any changes from what's proposed in this report.
Any further questions on C8? If not, we'll move to C9, approval for the introduction of a trial verge valet service. Any questions on this one? Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, this is a question for Greystead, I believe. As I understand it, the community have had their opportunity to respond to this information, the Verge Valet service, and did so in quite significant numbers. Did that community have your say survey include information regarding the quantity that only 3 cubic metres would be collected in the Verge Valet service? Was that raised in the community survey, or was that just not mentioned? Thank you.
Manager for Operations and Environment.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor Taylor, no, that wasn't put in the introduction on your Have Your Say page, but it is a size that is accepted through the other councils using it. It doesn't seem to have been an issue that it's not big enough or small enough.
Further questions on the trial valet verge? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just a question to Technical Services. I received some information in response to questions today that I'd put in on Monday, so thank you very much for that. That was good. Just wondering, though, if some of that that financial information could just be put into the report, about the costs and relative costs and things like that, where it's nothing confidential, of course, but I think it's good information perhaps that the community would like to know. The other way I can approach it is I can ask the questions tonight and you could answer it so it's sort of on record. So I don't know which way you'd like to approach that, and if it's possible to put some more info on the financials in the report. Thank you.
Okay, I just think there's a couple of clarification questions that the staff have.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Taylor, would Councillor like to know what the existing budget is included in the financials? I'm not too sure what information you require. I provided you with the previous expenditure that has happened and the existing budget for next year, 21-22.
I'm sorry, I probably wasn't very clear. You have answered those questions, I think, in the email you've given me, and it was circulated to all EMs. But what I'm asking is that some of that information would be put in the report. I mean, we've got it, and it's just a matter of putting it into the report. Some of it, the questions, all the answers, should I say, in some kind of summary form. We don't know the proposed Verge Valet service costs. We've got a budgeted amount, but I mean, that would be good to put in there, the budgeted amount for that, and what the old service was costing us in terms of, it seems like there was a budgeted amount and then there's an actual because we paid a bit more or it cost a bit more. Is that correct?
Just getting to your original question, then we might have that second one answered. Just if I'm understanding you correctly, I think what Councillor Jennings is looking for is the information that was in the email circulated to elected members goes into the public agenda report, so that information regarding financials is recorded in the public council document regarding that item. Is that pretty much what you were getting at? So that was one thing that Councillor Jennings was asking, if the report could be updated to include that financial information that you've circulated. And then you just had a second question on a budgeted amount, but we don't know the exact amount. Was that your question?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the clarifying what my question was, because obviously wasn't clear in the first place. No, I think I may be unclear, and this is my question. For 2020-21, the current waste service, the answer to my question about that was it's 153,000. And then and then subsequently the information given the budget for 2021. Oh, that's a different year. Sorry, so that's less. So is the budget, is that amount the annual cost for 2021, 153,000? Is that the budgeted amount, or that's an amount above the currently budgeted amount? Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. The 2021 is what was expended on the existing bulk verge collection, so that was the two services. The budget for 21-22 would be for the verge valet or the two bulk services. Very difficult to pin, to give an exact figure on what we're going to actually collect, because it depends on how much is put out. Because we pay for obviously the removal of it, and then we pay for the disposal of it. So it's an average over the years that we try to look at the budget for. But our waste service is on a cost recovery basis. So this is what we'd like to spend on this area. What has been demonstrated in the Verge Valley, that there is a reduction of costs, because there's not as much rubbish collected. So that's why the budget is slightly less, but it may or may not be. We'd have to see how it goes.
Okay, any further questions on C9? Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, further questions to technical services. There's suggestion in the report that community could give their waste, use their waste in different ways, such as give it to community groups, through Facebook groups and so on. Has there been any evidence that this is not already happening? Since in my community there's quite a lot of activity on our Buy Nothing Facebook page, and I regularly give to charities. Is that just an assumption, or is that actually a fact?
Councillor, we did have the workshop, I think it was just last Tuesday, so we do have some of that information on the councillor portal, because there was some specific questions around that, because that's been one of the things that other cities have trialled, as in how did it affect the, for want of a better word, the sort of free cycling rather than recycling. And on the evening of the workshop, the presenter did talk about how some people put their stuff on the Verge for a pickup, but also notify Buy Nothing sites that these items are available. And so when the Verge collection comes, they pick up, for want of a better word, whatever's left. And your question wasn't...
You've missed... Through you, Mayor Taylor, I think you've misunderstood the point that I'm making, is that there's suggestion that we should do more of the other. My question was, is there evidence that we are not already doing that? Because there are plenty of people who do that in our community. So I'm just suggesting that perhaps that assumption is a wrong assumption, but I might be wrong, because there might be some evidence to suggest otherwise. But can I ask my next question? I take your point that it was discussed, but I was just wondered whether there was some suggestion that that wasn't happening in our community, when I just assumed that maybe it was. But I'm happy to move on to the next question, Mayor, if you're happy to let me. Thank you. This is relating to illegal dumping. Can I ask that question now? Yes, I'd like to ask.
Yes, please. Sure, ask an illegal dumping question.
Thank you. Obviously, there are concerns, and I think quite valid ones, and I do take that as quite a good reason for this service. But the question of illegal dumping is one that I'm just concerned won't be ameliorated by the Verge Valet service. But can we just look at ways that might be addressed, and do you think that in reality that it can be improved through the Verge Valet service? So it's really a subjective one, I suppose, but again, I'm just concerned that it may not improve because a lot of the Verge Valet service is during the day and stealth dumping is at night, from my understanding. Thank you.
Manager for Operations and Environment, perhaps you could talk about the strategy around minimising the illegal dumping.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Illegal dumping is not a huge problem within the city of Subiaco, and the legal dumping comes in two parts. One where residents bring their rubbish to the city when we have bulk verge collections, and what tends to happen as soon as people see that's taking that bulk verge collection is taking place, we have a lot of visitors into the city, businesses nearby, that then bring in their rubbish. So it tends to increase it on your bulk verge, whereas it's not that much of an issue during normal times in the city. We've never tracked it. We've started to track it now, but one of the advantages of the Verge Valet service is previously it used to sit on the verge because we'd tape it off when we say under investigation. It's really difficult to investigate it because we rely on residents' feedback to provide us with that type of information. So the advantage now is if our rangers see it and there's no hope of finding out who it did, is they book the Verge Valet and it's immediately collected. Our staff don't have to collect it. It's not our costs. And it's taken care of a lot quicker than it normally would be.
Thank you. Further questions on C9? Councillor McMullen.
Yeah, I'm just interested in the practice of people putting their rubbish on the verge and then posting on buy nothing type sites that there's something going. I've often heard, and I'm not sure whether it's real law or bush law, that once something's put on the verge, it belongs to the council. So I'm wondering if this type of practice is one which we can actually condone, and I suppose if we should be encouraging it or not. Just wondering if the staff have given any thought to that.
Manager for Operations and Environment.
Thank you. And through you, Ms. Taylor, we don't have a waste local law that manages that type of activity. So in July, waste local law to go out for publication is coming to council, which then addresses those type of issues. At the moment, we manage rubbish through our health local law, which is not sufficient to manage verge collections, what's put on the verge, when you can and who can, and this gives council more heads of power to control that type of bulk verge. So that's coming to council in July.
Further questions on C9? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I have a few questions. One, I just wanted to, I'm surprised no one's asked about the war strategy. Perhaps they understand it, but I just thought if briefly the acting director could actually very briefly explain what the war strategy is. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. The war strategy is the state government's targets for reduction and resource recovery, and all of the local government's waste plans have been developed around that strategy to reduce waste, and we have targets. And for example, by 2025, we have to introduce a FOGO system, we have to reduce waste generation by 5% per capita, and we have to recover 60% of our resources. That changes in 2030, so it's just strategies that they've set as targets for us to reduce waste to landfill.
Thank you. I also understand that the City of Subiaco operations were actually involved in the original formation of Verge, developing it up. Is that correct? And if so, why didn't we move earlier on this particular service? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor, yes. All of the member councils for WMRC had a working group that have had officers involved from the beginning of the Verge Valley development. What would work, what wouldn't, what would suit everybody, so the city has been involved from the beginning. The city hasn't introduced this earlier because we had a contract in place for our bulk verge collections, which has now expired, which gives us the opportunity to either move into the trial Verge Valley, or we would go out to tender to carry on with our bulk verge collections as it is.
Thank you. I think some people too are concerned that the pickup is a Thursday, although that may change is it right that the contractor may actually, if the contractor gets more trucks and people, we may have another choice of that day. But I assume that it's still possible for people, if they have a big working bee on the weekend, that they can put their verge ready for pickup on the Monday, even if it's not actually picked up till the Thursday. Is that correct?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Taylor. Yeah, it's encouraged 3 days before, and that's the whole purpose of the Verge Valet, is to keep the rubbish out on the verge for as little time as possible. It gives the opportunity for people to have 52 days of the week, or nearly of that, to have their bulk verge collected. So it gives them far more opportunity to plan. Plus the limits, when you go onto the webpage, the limits are clearly decided on what you can and can't do. So you have 2 of those, and you can do those in 2 weeks in a row, or you can book additional services at a cost, or if you really want to, you can take it to the recycling centre on your own. So there are a number of options. It just gives you far better control of the waste you want to generate.
And final question, thank you, through you, Mayor. I mean, as you said, this is very much related to the war strategy and our responsible management of waste. Now, it says here one of the benefits are reducing the presentation of hazardous waste and non-compliant material. So how do you think that or suggest that the Verge Valet is going to help with that reduction and with the more responsible management of hazardous waste? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. When you book your Verge Valet, it actually goes through a number of steps. First of all, what you can and how you could recycle alternatively with the stuff that you're going to put out. It then gives you the sizes, then goes through exactly what you can put out. You book the service, it goes through it again and tells you what you can and can't put out. So it's really at the forefront when you're booking it, right there just before when you're going to put your bulk verge out, as opposed to, you've got 6 months to do it, you've collected all of the stuff and you're just getting there, and you now know it's the first week in July and you've been all that stuff. You have forgotten what you can and can't take out, even though you've been notified at that time. So there's more education around it. Plus, if the contractor arrives to pick up that stuff, they will notify you and leave a note for you that this is hazardous substance, can't be, please take it off. And then the city gets a report on it as well. Excuse me, I think so as well.
Sorry, there is one more question. So in our present bulk verge system, we're not allowed to put hazardous waste out, but people lose sight of that and tend to put it out. So then what happens? I assume it's just left on the verge, and how do we then deal with it? Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Taylor. The city picks it up, and we dispose of it. The city has to pick it up because otherwise we end up a battle with the residents. We don't know who does it. They said they didn't do it. Yeah, it's part of the illegal dumping again. So we have to pick it up and we clear it. We take it. Yes.
Further questions on C9? I think Councillor De Vries.
It's a very simple one. Why was 18 months chosen, through you, Mayor Taylor? Why was 18 months the chosen period for the trial, and could it be shorter? Thank you.
The proposal was 18 months. The feedback we got from WMRC is that by the time the people actually understand they have a new service in place, that first 6 months is not used that much, and then it starts to take off. And with education and with more use, people use it then more often. So that was considered a better time. Often you only end up with a couple of months of where it's actually been utilised fully. When they do the service, they send out a feedback form as well, which gives you that feedback continually of whether you're happy with the service, what could be improved. So that was just a longer trial. If council wants to reduce it, we're doing a bulk verge collection in August, the last one, and then it's planned to implement this with a bit of advertising and putting it on our website to roll it out October, November, and then roll it out after that.
I'm sorry to go on about talking rubbish. Through you, Mayor Taylor, just a simple question to the effect of, if it was to be rolled out in November, December, then wouldn't a 13th month trial, sort of year to year, work quite well in terms of a shortened length, or any other alternative that you might suggest?
I think the officer's said what his recommendation is, and the officer's recommendation report says 18 months as well. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? Thank you. Councillor Hammersley, did you have a question?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, it does say for a period of 18 months, but doesn't really say from when, and I think Councillor De Vries' question is a valid question. Would it be 18 months from that November, or 18 months from next week, assuming that we were to pass the resolution?
Thank you, through you, Mate. From when the Verge Valet starts, we need, obviously the contractor doesn't know if we're going to do this. So once a decision is made by council, they have to set up their organisation to do that. The WMRC have to set up their online services to accommodate the city of Subiaco, and we're not sure of that, what that time frame may be. It may be 2 months, 3 months. We don't want to start it in December, really. So October would be our best bet, and then we can get it going from when it starts, which will be advertised on the city's website, the newspapers.
Yes. Now, the proposal for the trial is to have the 3 square metres, and we may have 3 cubic metres. We may have been told this, but I've forgotten. Is that a requirement of the WMRC, or is that a limit that we're setting ourselves?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, that's a requirement from the WMRC. And I don't know if that was in negotiation with the contractor, and that was considered a specific or a normal size more than anything else. But I want to imagine they have to restrict it, otherwise you end up in a situation where you've got tons and tons of it, and then they can't keep up, and they can't keep up with the capacity. You'd get to the situation where one neighbour books it, and then he tells all of his mates in the road, and now you've got a pile that's just going to take you 2 days to clear.
Yeah, but if we did the trial and the community feedback was, actually we love it, except that it's not quite big enough, I suppose there would be an opportunity to negotiate later if we were going to go into it full time, not for unlimited, but say 3.5 or 4 or whatever, you know. So I'm just wondering if that sort of negotiation would be, you know, possible in the future.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, I see no reason why not, but I can't see why the City of Subiaco residents are different to 3 other local governments using it at the moment. So there's been no feedback about that size being an issue, but it would be something we could look at into the future if necessary. However, it would be at considerable more cost.
If there's no further questions on C9, I'll move to C10, the review of the Register of Delegations. Any questions on C10? I'll move to C11 then. Oh, no, 11's not on the agenda and 12's not on the agenda. So we'll go to C13, Financial Statements and Reports for the month ending 30th of April 2021. Any questions? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And through you, I'd just like to ask about the 2 invoices to Mr. Stephen Tweedy. It appears for governance, they add up to about $8,000. Is it correct that since November 2020, there's now been invoices close to $35,000 for this person's services?
Director, would you like to take that one? Okay. And Director Hawkins is saying he'll take that on notice, Councillor Stroud.
I have another question, thank you. Just in researching Stephen Tweedy, I understand he's a local government lobbyist and he's also served as a returning officer. Is Mr Tweedy also a lawyer?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, not to our knowledge.
So I'd also like to ask, is the governance advice we are seeking related to the authorised inquiry?
Through you, Mayor Taylor, no. Stephen provides just governance support in terms of his knowledge and experience in the governance space, policy development and all those kind of things, supporting the governance team.
Any further questions on C13? If not, we'll finish there. That was our last item. I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 15th of June closed at 7:06 p.m. Thank you, everyone.